In today's Farm Report, American farm broadcasters met in Kansas City last week at the National Association of Farm Broadcasters annual convention and meeting. One of the speakers at the convention was the USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service Administrator, Phil Karsting, and he talked about the recently completed Trans-Pacific Partnership. Cindy Zimmerman with AgriPulse has more.
USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service Administrator Phil Karsting spoke to farm broadcasters in Kansas City this week about what the Trans-Pacific Partnership offers for U.S. farmers and ranchers and the rest of America.
I think the central question for American agriculture right now is whether or not we're better with or without TPP. And from my perspective, the resounding answer is that we are better off with TPP. 20% of American farm income comes from exports. It supports 52 million people who live in rural America, and not just farmers, it's processors, shippers, marketers, people all along the value chain. This is a huge deal about setting the rules of the road for 40% of the globe's economy. We need to remind everybody all across the country, every small town, every rural community, that everybody has skin in this game. Every other row of soybeans goes overseas nowadays. It wasn't that way when I was a kid. One day of every week's worth of dairy production is exported. Those are meaningful opportunities for our producers. They're meaningful for global food systems. The Trans-Pacific Partnership makes a meaningful contribution to trade systems that work.
Karsting was asked about comments made last week by Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah that parts of the TPP may need to be renegotiated, particularly where it concerns protection of intellectual property rights.
We will have continued conversations with Senator Hatch, but the reality is that these agreements are an amalgam of a whole lot of very intensely negotiated details. And you start pulling one string in one place and something else comes apart in another place. And so the hope would be that people will become more familiar with what's in the agreement. People have had now the complete text to look at and realize that our negotiators did a great deal of work to try to come up with a sensible approach to all aspects, including the intellectual property pieces. And so that those conversations will continue. But it's not a simple matter of just reopening the text and saying, okay, we're going to redo this piece of it, because every piece of that agreement is related to every other piece.
Reporting for AgriPulse, I'm Cindy Zimmerman.
What does the Endangered Species Act of the future look like? If you ask the chief of USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, it involves partnerships and working lands conservation.
I feel we're really on a cusp of a new approach in dealing with species conservation in the United States.
Chief Jason Weller was among the panelists for a Washington, D.C. event and webcast Tuesday, discussing the ESA of the future, along with Interior Department Deputy Assistant Secretary Michael Bean. Bean notes the recent no listing of western sage-grouse as an ESA candidate species as an example of how collaborative conservation serves as a proactive approach to save species and their habitat.
The decision not to list that species was widely heralded as a real breakthrough in endangered species accomplishments.
NRCS Chief Weller says similar success stories, such as the no listing of the New England cottontail rabbit earlier this year, demonstrates
that you take a really collaborative approach, but a proactive approach, targeted approach, you can make a difference.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Mastitis management is important if you want to maintain your milk production in your herd. Emily Wilmes with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office shares some tips on how you can detect if mastitis is in the herd.
Fighting mastitis on your dairy can be a difficult task. For one cow, a treatment will work great and she's back to normal in a short amount of time. For another cow, that same treatment may have little to no success and you're left scratching your head about what to do to help this cow. This would be a perfect time for you to start doing milk sample bacterial cultures on your cows. Why is this helpful? Well, it's the only way to 100% diagnose infectious mastitis, but more importantly, it identifies the causative organism. Back to our cow we can't clear up the infection on. It's possible her mastitis was caused by a different pathogen than her herd mate's was. The mastitis tube you treated the first cow with may not be effective against the pathogen the second cow has. Milk culturing can be done through the DHIA, so be sure to ask your field rep about it on your next test day. Collecting a sample is easy to do and doesn't take a lot of extra time. You just need to make sure the teat is clean and dry and that you have a clean and dry tube to put the sample in. Hold the tube at an angle when squirting the milk in, and after you have collected the sample, place it in the refrigerator or freezer to keep cold until it can be picked up or delivered. If you aren't convinced individual cow culturing is for you, then you can try doing a bulk tank culture. Bulk tank culturing is still a useful tool because it can help determine the general types of bacteria present in cows within a herd, as well as the amount of exposure to environmental bacteria. Keep in mind it won't give you a full picture of what each cow has, only individual tests can do that. However, it is a rapid, inexpensive way to determine some types of information when trying to troubleshoot problems in the dairy herd or for monitoring environmental exposure. When collecting a bulk tank sample to send in, you will want to take a sample 5 days in a row. This will improve the accuracy of your test result. Each of the 5 days, agitate the tank well 5 to 10 minutes before sampling. Be sure you use a clean dipper, and don't be afraid to ask your milk truck driver if you have any questions about the procedure, as they have lots of experience taking tank samples. Since you're taking 5 days' worth of samples, you will want to freeze each sample to discourage bacteria growth. Keep in mind milk expands when it freezes, so only fill the sample tube about 2/3 full. If you need to ship the samples yourself, make sure they are packed in a way that will keep them frozen. Labs can only test samples that arrive frozen or cold. Doing a milk sample bacterial culture for your individual cows or even your bulk tank will help you determine what pathogens you are fighting as well as the environmental exposure of your herd. Bulk tank samples especially are very economical, but you will find individual samples can be cost-effective as well, as you won't be wasting time or money on mastitis tubes that aren't effective. If you have any questions about culturing your milk or about mastitis and milk quality in general, call me at the Stearns County Extension Office at 320-255-6169. This is Emily Wilmus with University of Minnesota Extension.
This has been an interesting couple of days in Cuba.
Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack on Friday winding up his Cuban trip. He, along with a group of U.S. lawmakers, not only touring agricultural facilities, co-ops, farm markets, but also meeting with the Cuban vice president and several top trade and agricultural officials.
These conversations are designed first and foremost to begin the process of building a relationship between the American people and the Cuban people, understanding that agriculture can act as a bridge in developing that relationship.
But he said there are barriers to the ag-trade relationship, mostly coming from the U.S. embargo legislation.
Requiring that a product be paid for in dollars, the fact that credit is currently not available to those in Cuba who are purchasing American product, and that we still require Cubans to work indirectly through a series of third country banks.
Vilsack said he hopes these restrictions will be lifted soon and that at some point his department will be able to have a permanent presence in Cuba to help smooth the way to more trade when the embargo is lifted. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.